It's 10:10. Let's do this. Thank you all for coming. So, using lockpicking to teach authentication concepts, or as the terrible pun I put earlier, picture it didn't happen. Yay. I'm Kat, by the way. I am the leading lady of lockpicking here at B-Sides, along with Wendy Knox-Everett. So if you're curious about learning more, we've got a nice lockpick village in the chill-out room. Y'all should come by later. Sweet Cat on Twitter. Feel free to tweet me. Pronouns are she, her. I'm cis, but I like to try and normalize the whole not assuming pronouns as much as possible. So let's get to it. So what are we trying to solve for here? So security can be a very difficult thing to communicate to those who aren't familiar with it. So when we're teaching security concepts, a lot of what we're presenting to people who might not be as familiar with security is very abstract and very difficult to convey. This whole idea of think like a hacker. What does that even mean if you don't, if you're not already in that mindset of think like a hacker? So how do you get people into that mindset? So we need to be thinking about effective novel approaches. So there's been some really good work on this, both in like the security education community and just other security practitioners. There's like the Analogies project. Jesse Irwin gave a really good talk at ShmooCon a few years ago called Speak Security and Enter, about using certain more universal analogies for teaching the security mindset, teaching security concepts. But not too many of these have gone on into a hands-on kind of thing. A lot of times we're still dealing in abstractions. So how do we solve for that? So big academic words, embodied cognition. I should just preface the fact that I am not an academic, nor am I a psychologist, so this is very armchair. But embodied cognition basically is the educational or and psychological theory that cognition is influenced by more than the brain itself, also influenced by the entire body and the surrounding environment. So one application of this in educational theory involves using concrete objects and concrete metaphors to teach these abstract concepts. So that was kind of the idea behind this. Literally came out of late night conversations with a friend of mine a couple of years ago who was a PhD student in computer science education, and she built a curriculum that she actually taught at Roots a few years ago, Caroline Harden, on teaching open source software to kids using a metaphor of Legos that were, some of them were glued together, the proprietary ones, and some of them you could take apart, the open source ones. And like open source licensing is not an easy thing for 8-year-olds to wrap their brain around, but they got it. And so I was thinking, what other security, how can we apply this to security? So that was kind of the thought behind all of this, turning the abstract into the concrete. So that's kind of the focus of this. So why lockpicking? A few reasons. One, it has a very low barrier to entry. I have taught kids how to lockpick. There are a lot of kids who came by the lockpick village yesterday. Well, I guess a lot by standards of a security conference in Vegas. But it's something that people can generally pick up pretty easily if they have decent manual dexterity, or even crappy manual dexterity if they have use of their hands. Most people can pick up the lockpicking skills in a pretty short period of time, especially when we're talking about one-pin locks. It also has a very low threshold of gratification. Lockpicking is sexy. People want to learn how to pick locks. It's a thing that people enjoy knowing how to, saying they know how to do, and so it therefore incentivizes people's interest in learning more about the security concepts that it represents. If you are doing a thing that is fun, that's going to be more engaging than something that you think is just really, really dry. It also has possibilities of think like an attacker and think like a defender, because locks are a barrier. They're a security control. And so you can think of that as a thing guarding something that you want to protect, as well as something that you're trying to break into. So think like an attacker is useful, but you also have to think like a defender. And one that I didn't put on the slide too is a lot of security professionals have experience with lockpicking, and so it's an easy thing, or an easy enough thing to teach people rather than trying to learn something new yourself and then go and spread that to an audience. So I don't mind making any assumptions about the audience's lockpicking levels, so I just want to give you a high-level overview of the basic theory of lockpicking, the super quick and dirty version. If you want a slightly less quick and dirty version, the Lockpick Village has beginner sessions that they'll be holding at 11:30 and 2:30 today, and we're also just happy to come by and teach lockpicking if you stop by. And we'll have contests at 4 p.m. I promise this talk isn't just a shameless plug for the Lockpick Village, but it's more of a, if you want to learn more, go here. So basically, you have a lock. This is a sort of sideways view of the guts of it. And there are these stacks of pins, driver pins, key pins. The key pins are all cut to different sizes, which is why keys look jagged. And so the driver pins are all the same size. So when you have a key, you're pushing all the pins up at once and getting them all above the shear line so that that cylinder turns. With lockpicks, you're doing them one at a time, and it's a lot of trial and error. You're going in blind. There are those clear practice locks, but for the most part, you can't see what you're doing. So it's just kind of a figuring it out. And so, yeah, lockpicking basics. So how do you map that to authentication? So the passwords track, you probably, the basics of authentication, the process of verifying who you are. God, it's really hard to come down from the nerves of having an AV failure. That's okay, we'll make it work. So basically, verifying who you say you are by something you have, like a hardware token or something like that, something you know, like a password, or a security question, something everybody knows. So locks can be a form of physical security. You can have a key, something you have, but you can also think of as an analogy for a password, something you know. And so you can take that idea of this is a thing that I have that somebody else might not have and use that to apply it broadly. So evasion is the word I was missing on my slide, missed in Hacker Pyramid last night. But when I often teach lockpicking workshops, I start with, why would you pick a lock when you could just break the door down or blow it up or bump the key? So a lot of it comes back to this. You don't want to leave evidence. Why would you want to leave behind what you're doing? And so this is something that is obviously very broaden security. Attackers don't just have a goal of gaining access by any means necessary. The more sophisticated ones aim to get in without leaving any evidence of having gained access, and leave a back door so they can get back in. Hey, back door locks are on back doors. Terrible puns. So if you're doing some kind of brute forcing, that's going to set off alerts and show up easily in logs. And so it's about going in stealth mode. And so, water. By the way, I also forgot to say this at the beginning because we had some fires we were putting out, but I'm happy to take questions at any time. I will not take 5-paragraph long statements, but if you have questions, feel free to ask them. I'll either hold the mic to you or just repeat your question for the sake of the recording or for people who can't hear very well. So feel free. So yeah, basically, leave no trace. So we also want to talk about uniqueness. One of the most common problems of good security hygiene that we come across is password reuse. And so how do you really drill home the importance of not reusing a password? Well, you think about it, even though keys might not be even though locks might not have 50 pins and be super, super complicated, we don't use the same key for everything that we lock. So in the event that one gets compromised, in the event that somebody breaks into your house, you don't have to replace every single key you own. And so similarly, in the event of a breach, an attacker could use a compromised password to access any account that was associated with it. And so we want to drill home that it's easier cleanup after a compromise. Complexity is another one. There are more pick-resistant locks that exist, but they're more costly and difficult to manufacture, and so they often lock more critical assets. And so there's these different levels of difficulty with picking locks. And so while we don't encourage weak password use, the fact of the matter is some people are going to use weaker passwords. And so if people need to balance what they use their strongest passwords for, we want to make sure they're focusing on accounts with the most sensitive information. A friend of mine put it really well. She said, never spend more on a defensive solution than the thing you're protecting is worth. Yay, risk. So when I taught security workshops, I often go in a little bit into data classification. What is the thing you're trying to protect? How sensitive is it? How risky is it to the business and to the person if it gets leaked? And so we can think of the different levels of complexity of locks and the ability to pick them and the resistance to picking as the strength of passwords based on the sensitivity of the information you're trying to protect. And not even just the strength of passwords, the strength of the various security controls you're putting around them. Also, defense in depth. One of the things I'm always trying to rail against is that there aren't any silver bullets, and when people often learn how to pick locks, sometimes their first thought is, oh my god, I'm going to go cry in a fetal position because nothing I own is safe. If I can pick this lock, everything is fucked. But again, and sometimes security people are the same way, especially pen testers. They're like, I got root in 5 seconds. Oh my God, this entire organization could be completely pwned. But again, security is all about balances and trade-offs. And so it's still an extra layer of resistance. And that's what we try to emphasize with you still lock your cars, you still lock the doors to your house. And so there's no single silver bullet. There is a need for a layered approach. And so this is where we can talk about defense in depth. And we can talk about maybe you put a lock on your door, or maybe you've got a home alarm system. Authentication and access control will never be perfect on its own. We're trying to kill the password. Even then, like, there's always going to be stuff. So we want to try to build around things to minimize the attack surface in case of bypass. Things like password uniqueness, other technical and physical controls, all of that. So basically, it's a matter of saying, yeah, maybe everything is fucked, but we can still put layers around our various assets. So some limitations to this idea of using lockpicking to teach these concepts of passwords and authentication and security. Lockpick laws vary by state. Tool has a list of lockpick laws by state on their website, and I think they have a few other countries as well. But there are some places that we live where we might not be able to do this, especially other countries with more stringent lockpick laws. Like I know Tennessee, just having picks on you is considered intent. Most of the other states it's not, but you never know. There can be social consequences and legal consequences, even in places where lockpicking is legal. Certain populations, especially certain demographics, may face consequences if they're carrying picks around or if they learn how to pick, especially like, I don't know, we'll just say it like racism is a thing, and certain people are more likely to face consequences if they get stopped and they have picks on them than others, and it's shitty. Also, analogies in general can be a really useful teaching tool, but they can also fall apart if we don't draw solid connections to the concepts that we're trying to convey with them, or if we take an analogy a little further than it's applicable. Like some people keep going down a rabbit hole and saying, how does this lock thing map to this security thing? And that's not always going to be possible. So it's important that we can sort of set boundaries around some of that and use this hands-on thing to draw an analogy, but know that it's not going to be a catch-all. So, God, I really blew through this because I was afraid I was going to be strapped for time because I started 10 minutes early, and yeah. So what comes next? I had to throw in a Hamilton reference. Lockpicking to teach authentication is just one of many possibilities. This hands-on approach can be applied broadly, and I encourage you to think about what you want to convey to people about security, and how you can draw that to something that's hands-on and not just them sitting in a lecture, because they're not going to soak up as much information that way as when they're actually playing with stuff, or at least interacting. As security professionals, we deal largely in these really abstract concepts, and just trying to repeat them over and over to somebody who is trying to learn is not the best. So if we can teach the importance of digital security by drawing these physical conclusions, these hands-on analogies, we become more effective at our jobs, and our users become safer as a result. So I really rushed through this talk. But if you have any questions, we've got a lot of time, so I will take any of them. Yes. Yeah, here.
You brought up a good point about the carrying the lockpicks around. Like, I was wondering if I bought a kit, bringing it back on a plane to where I'm, in Santa Monica, how that would go.
Yep, it's on. You've just got to kind of like hug the mic, practically eat it. So the question was picks on a plane, basically. I'm not sick of these motherfucking pics on this motherfucking plane. So yeah, if you're traveling domestically, you should be fine. Tools are allowed if they're under 6 inches. I've never had a problem with TSA stopping me for lockpicks. I haven't traveled with them to another country before, but it depends on the country's lockpick laws. As far as locks, if you've got a buttload of locks in your suitcase, TSA might be a little freaked out because you've got this giant pile of metal in your suitcase, but you should be fine. Anyone else? Yeah. Got you next.
I was just thinking about his his question on a plane. I've only been stopped one time. I carry 2 lockpick kits with me in my wallet, and I've only been stopped one time, and TSA just looked at him. He just gave me weird looks at, what are these locks for? What are these picks for? It's the job.
Yeah, exactly. Oh.
Just normally I don't have a problem carrying lockpicks themselves, but a few times I've had those little lockpick sets that are like a small pocket knife, and those have been challenged by TSA. So I'm not sure why they really focus on it. But.
Pocket knife. They don't like those. All right, Urban.
Hey, so I don't have like a great well-formed question, but I'm really curious about sort of the embodied cognition aspect of this, and just like if you've seen specific cases of sort of people like actually understanding password cracking or password manipulation better as a result of manipulating locks physically.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to draw correlation from, or hard to draw causation from correlation, but I have seen people sort of like, when I've sort of talked about password cracking while doing it, then they do tend to get it. They're like, yeah. So, yeah. Yeah.
Hi. Ooh, you got really easy, haven't you? I was just going to add my own experience on that. So I teach basic crypto using physical, using locks and symmetrical, asymmetrical, and different keys and bits and pieces. So I found when I teach, it's exactly the same setup. That the physical hands-on really works. You've got lockpicking teaching passwords. Have you got anything, or have you tried any other physical analogy that works?
Not yet, but I'm always trying to think about that. Security education is a big part of my role at work, and so I'm always trying to think of how we can incorporate anything that's interactive or hands-on, especially since they've found that like even just doing something with your hands, even if it's completely orthogonal to what you're teaching, can be useful. Like, I don't know, like playing with a fidget toy or something while you're listening. And like in college, I would knit during lectures, and they found that just doing something with your hands can help with retention of information. So I'm always trying to keep that in mind. But if you have ideas, please, by all means, implement them, share them widely. Yeah.
A question for the gentleman who was just speaking. Where do you have an actual asymmetric physical lock set that you can use to describe PKI? I've been looking for something like that.
So the thing that I've seen used in like videos for talking about PKI is actually like a lockbox where you can like unlock the top with one and unlock the bottom with another. So, but I don't know if you've got anything to add. Very similar. Or paper and envelopes. Nice. Cool. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. It's given me some ideas that I can take back when I do some general user training, awareness training. Question about the analogy for, do you have an analogy perhaps for multi-factor authentication, maybe the home alarm with a code that's like randomized, maybe something I can use?
Yeah, this is kind of my bread and butter that I need to think about a lot more, but I work for Duo Security, so 2FA is one of our things. Oftentimes, the thing that I talk about is ATMs. You have a card, something you have, and then you have a PIN, something you know. But there's got to be a lot of things out there for MFA. Cool. Anyone else? All right, we finished super early, so if you have follow-up questions that you prefer to not answer in a crowd or you want to catch me afterwards, I'll be around for a little while, and then you can probably find me in the Lockpick Village for a bunch of the day. Again, I'm sorry for the AV issues, and I'm sorry that I then rushed through this talk, but we got through it. Thank you all for coming.